It all started with small things, little moments that didn't quite fit together like shards of broken glass scattered across the floor of my life. My son Jamie was 7 years old, too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships, but old enough to notice the tension that hovered like a dark cloud in our home. He was a bright boy, curious and loving, but sometimes in the way he looked at my husband's secretary Helen, something felt off. Helen was always around like a shadow I couldn't shake. She was young, poised, with a quiet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first I thought she was just doing her job, managing my husband's calendar, answering his calls, the perfect assistant. But the way Jamie looked at her made my skin crawl. It wasn't admiration or friendship. It was something more confused, something I couldn't place. I told myself it was my imagination. After all, how could my husband Mark betray me? We had been married for 15 years. We had built a life together. Yet the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I ignored the signs, the whispers in my heart screaming at me to look closer. One evening, I caught Jamie whispering Helen's name, but not as Mrs. Thompson or the lady who helps Daddy. No, Jamie called her Mom. My blood ran cold. My heart shattered in 1,000 pieces. How could this happen under my nose? How could my own son call another woman Mom? That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, questions swirling through my mind like a storm. Was Mark lying to me? Was Helen playing a role I never expected? And most painful of all, what did this mean for Jamie? The perfect family I once believed in was crumbling, and I was powerless to stop it. But I refused to stay silent. I promised myself that I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful, no matter how dark. Because some betrayals demand justice. I kept trying to tell myself it was nothing, that my fears were exaggerated, the product of a worried mother's imagination running wild. After all, Jamie was only 7. Kids are innocent and prone to silly attachments. Maybe it was just a phase. Maybe calling Helen Mom was some childish confusion, a misunderstanding that would fade with time. But deep down, I knew it was more. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, that the little cracks I'd noticed in our seemingly perfect family were about to turn into chasms too wide to ignore. It started with the smallest details, the kind that get dismissed as coincidence until they pile up and suffocate you with their meaning. Jamie would linger by the study door a little longer than usual when Helen was there, eyes wide and hopeful. Mark's phone would buzz at odd hours, and he'd answer in hushed tones or ignore it altogether when I walked in. One afternoon, I was putting away laundry when I overheard a conversation from the kitchen doorway. Mark's and Helen's voices, low and urgent, the kind of talk meant to be private but impossible to keep quiet in a house this small. "We can't let her find out," Helen said, her voice trembling. "If Linda knew." Mark cut her off with a sharp edge I'd never heard before. "She can't know. Not yet. Not until we're sure." My heart slammed into my chest. My breath caught and I pressed my back against the wall, willing the floor to swallow me whole. What were they hiding? And why was my husband involved in some secret I wasn't meant to see? Days later, the unease became unbearable. Jamie's innocent confusion was turning into something deeper, more complicated. He'd bring up Helen's name randomly, as if testing the waters, looking for a reaction from me. I'd catch him staring at her in the distance with a longing that didn't belong in a child's gaze. One evening, I found a drawing tucked inside Jamie's backpack, a childish scrawl in crayon that tore my heart in two. It was a picture of our family, but not the one I recognized. There was Mark, tall and smiling, Jamie with his mischievous grin, and a woman who wasn't me, standing between them. Helen. My face wasn't in the picture. It was blank space, like I didn't exist. I stared at that drawing for what felt like hours, unable to breathe. How had this happened? How had my son's heart already been claimed by someone else? My mind screamed with questions I couldn't answer. Was this all my fault? Had I been blind to the signs for too long? That night, I sat beside Jamie on his bed, the soft glow of his nightlight casting shadows on the walls. I wanted to understand, to bridge the gap growing between us. Gently, I asked Jamie, "Why did you draw Helen in our family picture instead of me?" His eyes looked up at me, wide and innocent, unclouded by the storm raging inside me. "Because she's Mom," he said simply. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. 1,000 thoughts crashed through my mind: denial, anger, heartbreak. But I swallowed them all and forced a gentle smile. "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, as children do when they don't fully understand their feelings. "Because she's nice to me. She plays with me. She makes me happy." That should have warmed my heart, but it only made it ache. How could the woman who was tearing apart my marriage and my family be the one giving my son comfort? I looked at Jamie and saw the innocent soul caught in the crossfire, too young to comprehend the damage, but already feeling the pull of two worlds. I knew I had to find out everything. I couldn't live in denial anymore. I started watching Mark more closely, noting the subtle changes I'd missed before. The late-night meetings, the evasive answers when I asked about his schedule, the way he flinched when my voice startled him. Helen was no longer just a secretary. She was a presence that infiltrated every corner of our lives, quietly erasing my role as wife and mother. I remember one evening vividly. Mark and Helen were in the kitchen laughing softly over something I couldn't hear. The way Mark looked at her with that secretive, intense gaze felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than any words. Helen's smile was too perfect, too practiced, like an actress playing a role meant only for Mark's eyes. I felt like a ghost in my own home. It wasn't just the emotional betrayal that ate at me. It was the way they were building a life without me, a parallel world where I was erased, invisible, irrelevant. I felt my sanity slipping. I kept a journal, a secret ledger of all the strange things I observed. I wrote down dates, times, snippets of overheard conversations, odd phone numbers. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle I was desperate to solve. One entry read, "Jamie called Helen Mom again today." I saw the way Mark looked when he heard it. Something between guilt and pride. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. Helen wasn't just an assistant. She was the architect of my downfall. She was the reason my son's innocent heart was divided, the reason my husband's loyalty was broken. I felt powerless to stop it, but I refused to be a victim. There was a night I couldn't sleep, pacing the floor of our bedroom thinking about what to do next. I thought about confronting Mark, but I was terrified of what I might hear. What if he confirmed all my fears? What if the truth destroyed not only our marriage but my relationship with Jamie? I also worried about Helen, the way she manipulated everyone around her. She was charming, always the perfect picture of innocence to outsiders. Who would believe a desperate wife over a poised, successful woman? But I had to try. I had to fight back. I began planning, gathering evidence, reaching out discreetly to people who might know more. I felt like a detective in my own life, hunting for clues in the ruins of my shattered family. The hardest part was watching Jamie. He was caught in a battle he didn't understand, his childish mind trying to reconcile two women claiming his love. He'd sometimes cry quietly at night, asking why Mommy and Helen didn't get along. His confusion was my agony. I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my son's future, for the chance to be the mother he needed, not the shadow in the background. Every day was a battle between hope and despair. Between the love I still had for Mark and the hatred growing for the man who had betrayed me. And in the quiet moments when I was alone, I made a promise to myself I would uncover the truth, expose their lies, and reclaim my family, no matter the cost. That moment when Jamie first called Helen Mom haunted me. It echoed in my mind every day, twisting around my thoughts like a thorny vine. I couldn't stop replaying it, trying to understand how my own son could choose to give that name, the one meant for me, to another woman. It was a whispered betrayal, a stab to my heart, and yet I was only beginning to scratch the surface of the damage that had already been done. I started to dig deeper quietly but relentlessly. I knew I couldn't confront Mark or Helen directly yet. Too many unknowns, too many risks. Instead, I became a shadow in my own home, watching, listening, piecing together the puzzle of their betrayal. Every subtle glance, every hidden text message, every secret meeting added fuel to the fire burning inside me. One afternoon, I found myself waiting outside Mark's office under the pretense of running errands nearby. I'd overheard his secretary's laughter, a melody far too familiar now mingling with his voice. I waited until the office door closed behind them, then slipped inside, heart pounding. The room was empty, but on Mark's desk lay a folder half hidden marked with initials I didn't recognize. I tucked it into my bag without thinking, the thrill of discovery overshadowing my fear. Back at home, I rifled through the folder's contents. Bills receipts, hotel bookings, dates coinciding with the late nights Mark had lied about. But the most damning were the emails between Mark and Helen, dripping with coded affection and secret plans. The words were unmistakable. They were building a life separate from me, with my son at the center. I felt sick. But beneath the nausea was something stronger, a surge of clarity and resolve. This was no accident, no innocent mistake. This was calculated, deliberate. I had to act, but I also had to protect Jamie. He was caught in a cruel tug of war, and I feared what the outcome might be if I moved too fast. In the days that followed, Jamie's attachment to Helen only deepened. He would cling to her during family dinners, ask for her approval, and mimic her gestures with a childlike devotion that broke my heart. I tried to reclaim his affection with quiet tenderness, reading his favorite stories, baking cookies together, creating moments meant to remind him I was still here, still his mother. But something had shifted inside him, a silent allegiance I couldn't break. One evening, Helen invited Jamie over under the guise of helping with a school project. I hesitated but let him go, wanting to trust my son's judgment. As I watched them leave hand in hand, I realized how much I'd already lost. I knew then that Helen wasn't just a secretary or a passing shadow. She was a threat, a woman who had wormed her way into my husband's heart and my son's world, stealing everything I had built. That night, I sat alone in the dark, clutching my journal. I wrote about my fears, my heartbreak, my plans. I wrote about the mother I wanted to be and the wife I needed to confront. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was from a friend of a friend, a woman who'd once worked with Helen. The message was brief, but loaded with promise. If you want to know what she's really like, meet me tomorrow. Hope flickered inside me. I wasn't alone. There was a way to bring the truth into the light. The next day, I met the woman at a quiet cafe. She told me stories I had only suspected: Helen's manipulations, her lies, the way she'd carefully dismantled other families before ours. Her words were a balm and a call to arms. I wasn't imagining things. Helen was dangerous. Armed with new knowledge and allies, I began to plan my next moves carefully. I couldn't just storm into their lives and demand answers. I needed undeniable proof, a way to protect Jamie from the fallout. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our home grew unbearable. Mark became more distant, Helen more brazen. Jamie's innocent smile masked confusion and pain. But I refused to give up. One night, after putting Jamie to bed, I confronted Mark. I showed him the emails, the folder, the proof I had collected. His reaction was cold, dismissive, a man who no longer cared about the woman he once promised to love. "You're making this into something it's not," he said. "Helen is part of my life now. So is Jamie." Those words cut deeper than any knife. I realized then that I was fighting not just for my family, but for my dignity. The war had begun. Confronting Mark had been a turning point, but I quickly realized it was only the first battle in a much larger war. His cold, dismissive reaction cut deeper than I expected, but it also clarified one brutal truth: he had made his choice. Helen wasn't just his secretary. She was the woman who had invaded every part of his life, and most devastatingly, our son's world. It was no longer about infidelity. It was about an entire family being stolen from me piece by piece. After that confrontation, I couldn't look at Mark the same way. The man I had loved, the husband I had trusted for 15 years, had become a stranger in my own home. The warmth and safety I had once associated with him had vanished, replaced by cold, distance, and secrecy. But the real challenge was Helen. I had underestimated her until now. She was not some naive woman swept up in an affair. She was a strategist, a master of manipulation. Beneath her calm, polished exterior, she was ruthless. I began to study her every move, searching for anything that could reveal her true nature. At first glance, Helen seemed flawless. She was the embodiment of professionalism, always impeccably dressed, always courteous and composed. She had a way of making people trust her, like a chameleon blending seamlessly into her environment. But I saw the cracks. The fleeting looks she exchanged with Mark when she thought no one was watching. The way she'd gloss over certain questions with practiced ease. The lies, small at first, but accumulating, about where she was after work, whom she was meeting, what she was doing. I caught her bending the truth more than once, and each lie was a thread I intended to pull. One evening, I decided to follow her. I couldn't bear the uncertainty anymore. I waited until she left the office, then trailed her at a distance. She seemed unaware, moving quickly but smoothly, confident she was untouchable. She met Mark at a cafe a few blocks away, and they slipped inside like conspirators sharing secrets. I watched them through the window. Mark's expression was soft, vulnerable, even nothing like the man who had so coldly brushed off my confrontation. Helen leaned in her hand, resting lightly on his arm. They talked in whispers, their connection unmistakable. My chest tightened with a mixture of jealousy and rage. This wasn't just an affair. It was a takeover. They were rewriting our family story without me. Back home, the hardest part was watching Jamie's confusion deepen. The boy I had raised, who once ran into my arms without hesitation, was now torn. He loved me, yes, but he was also drawn to Helen. He didn't understand why there were two women in his life claiming his affection. His questions became more pointed, and his loyalty seemed divided. "Mom, why doesn't Helen like you?" he asked one night, his voice trembling. "How can Helen be your mom when I'm right here?" He wondered aloud, eyes searching mine for answers I didn't have. Every question stabbed me like a knife. How could I protect him when the two most important adults in his life were at war? I knew I needed to do more than just gather evidence. I had to win Jamie back. But first, I had to bring Helen's true face into the light. I began documenting everything meticulously. I recorded their meetings discreetly, took photos of their secret rendezvous, and saved every suspicious text and email. I enlisted the help of my closest friend Sarah, who was not only loyal, but savvy with legal matters. Together, we created a dossier that was impossible to ignore. The more I uncovered, the more brazen Helen became. She started inserting herself into family events with calculated ease. Dinner invitations, school functions, weekend outings. She made sure to be where Jamie was to cement her role as a mother figure. Mark barely resisted. His indifference was a wound that bled daily. One evening, Helen stayed late for dinner at our house. She sat beside Jamie, holding his hand and whispering secrets that made him laugh, while I sat quietly, feeling like an outsider in my own home. The humiliation was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to confront her then and there, but I held back. I knew public scenes wouldn't help me win this battle. Instead, I focused on my son. After Helen left that night, I found Jamie lying in bed, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. "Why is this happening, Mommy?" he whispered. I pulled him close, feeling the weight of his confusion and pain. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I told him softly. But no matter what, I will always love you and I will always be your mom. In that moment, I realized that my fight wasn't just against Helen or Mark. It was for Jamie's heart and soul. I had to rebuild what was breaking apart. Slowly, I started reclaiming my role in his life. I cooked his favorite meals, helped with homework, and spent every spare moment with him. I told him stories from when he was a baby, shared memories that only a mother could know. Bit by bit, I built a bridge between us, fragile but real. At the same time, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Helen. I couldn't let her continue unchallenged. One afternoon, I arranged to meet her at a busy cafe, a place where the glare of witnesses would keep tempers in check. When she arrived, her smile was flawless, but I saw the flicker of something else: nervousness. Maybe I confronted her gently but firmly, laying out everything I knew. Her perfect composure wavered for a moment, but then she recovered, her eyes cold and calculating. "You don't understand," she said, her voice silky but sharp. "Mark and I love each other. Jamie deserves a real family." I didn't back down. A real family doesn't tear a mother away from her child. The conversation ended without resolution, but it forced Helen out of the shadows and into the light. Our private war was now public. Mark, faced with the undeniable truth, could no longer pretend. He chose Helen openly, severing ties with me and disregarding the bond with Jamie. His betrayal was complete. But in that destruction, I found something unexpected: strength. The woman I had been quiet and compliant was gone. In her place stood a mother ready to fight for her son and a woman reclaiming her power. The perfect ending for the two traitors was still to come, but I was no longer the victim. I was the storm. The moment Mark chose Helen over me was the moment my world started to unravel. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, it was the cold clarity that everything I had believed in, everything I had fought for, was slipping away. I could feel it in every corner of our home, in the silence between us, in the way Jamie looked at me with questions he couldn't voice. Those first days after Mark's decision were a fog of heartbreak and numbness. I moved through the house like a stranger, haunted by memories of better times and tormented by the reality that I was now an outsider in my own family. Jamie clung to me, his small hands tight around mine, but even he was pulled by the invisible thread that tied him to Helen and my husband. One evening, as I tucked Jamie into bed, he asked me something that broke me more than I expected. "Mom, why doesn't Daddy want us anymore?" His innocent question struck me like a bullet. How do you explain to a child that the man who promised to protect him was choosing someone else? How do you shield him from the cruelty of grown-up selfishness? "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "Sometimes adults make mistakes. But no matter what, I'll always be here for you. You're my whole world." That night, lying in the dark, I made a silent vow: no matter what, I would fight for Jamie. I would fight to be the mother he needed to protect him from the storm Helen and Mark had brought into our lives. But Helen was relentless. Her influence grew every day like a shadow spreading across our family. She posted pictures with Jamie on social media, images of laughter and warmth that painted her as the perfect stepmother. Friends and relatives began to question my role. The whispers started: "Is Linda really the mother Jamie needs? Helen seems so much nicer. Maybe Mark's right to choose her." The humiliation was suffocating. I was being erased, replaced by a woman who had never truly cared about our family, only about her own gain. I couldn't let this happen. I had to fight back, not just emotionally, but legally and strategically. I reached out to Sarah, my closest friend and confidant who had experience with family law. Together, we began gathering evidence not just of Mark's affair, but of Helen's manipulations and the emotional harm they were causing Jamie. I kept a detailed journal of every suspicious interaction, every lie Helen told, every moment Jamie seemed confused or hurt. I recorded phone conversations where Helen tried to isolate me from my son. We compiled emails, texts, and photos that showed their secret meetings and schemes. We prepared for a legal battle to protect my parental rights and Jamie's well-being, but I knew this fight wasn't just about papers and courts. It was about reclaiming my son's heart. One afternoon, I took Jamie to the park away from the pressures and lies. We sat on a bench under a sprawling oak tree watching children run and play. I told Jamie stories from when he was a baby, his first steps, his first laugh the nights I stayed awake just to hear his breathing. He looked at me eyes wide and searching and asked, "Mom, can you still be my mom even if Daddy and Helen don't want you to be?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Always," I said softly. "No matter what, I will always be your mom." That moment was a turning point. Jamie needed me, and I needed to be strong for him. Meanwhile, Helen's carefully constructed facade began to crack. The more evidence I gathered, the more brazen she became, desperate to hold on to the illusion she'd built. One day, I confronted her in a busy cafe, a place where witnesses would keep us in check. Her smile was flawless, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. I laid out everything I knew: her lies, her manipulation, her attempts to steal my family. She responded with cold cunning, claiming she loved Mark and wanted to build a real family with Jamie. But I didn't back down. I told her the truth. A family built on lies and betrayal was a house of cards waiting to collapse. That confrontation was only the beginning. Mark, faced with undeniable proof, could no longer hide behind excuses. He chose Helen, openly severing ties with me and disregarding the bond with Jamie. His betrayal was complete. But in that destruction, I found an unexpected strength. The woman I was before, quiet, compliant, was gone. In her place stood a mother ready to fight for her son and a woman reclaiming her power. I started rebuilding our lives. Jamie and I found small moments of joy, quiet dinners, bedtime stories, laughter that was soft but real. The scars of betrayal remained, but our bond grew stronger with every passing day. We were rebuilding piece by piece, but the battle was far from over. Helen and Mark didn't give up easily. Their attempts to isolate me intensified, and the legal battle loomed ahead. I braced myself for the fight to come, knowing that the perfect ending for two traitors was still on the horizon and that I would be the one to deliver it. The days following the confrontation felt like walking through a storm that never quite broke. Mark's decision to openly side with Helen didn't just sever our marriage, it sent shockwaves through every part of my life. I was no longer just a betrayed wife, I was a mother fighting for the future of my son, and that responsibility consumed me. The legal battle we faced was daunting. I knew Helen and Mark wouldn't give up without a fight, and they had resources and cunning on their side. But I was armed with truth evidence, and a fierce determination that came from deep within. Sarah became my anchor during this time. She helped me navigate the complex world of custody laws and parental rights. Together, we assembled the documentation that laid bare the manipulations and deceptions I'd witnessed: messages, photos, recorded, conversations, all painting a clear picture of Helen's attempts to insert herself into Jamie's life as a replacement mother. The hardest part wasn't the legal paperwork or the court dates. It was protecting Jamie from the emotional turmoil. He was too young to understand the complexities, but not too young to feel the tension tearing our family apart. One afternoon after school, Jamie came to me with a crumpled drawing. It was a family portrait, and this time, he had drawn me back in. I saw the tentative smile he gave me when he handed it over, a silent plea for reassurance. I held him close and whispered, "I'm right here, Jamie. Always." Slowly, I rebuilt our bond through small, everyday moments, helping with homework, baking his favorite cookies, reading bedtime stories with exaggerated voices. These were my weapons against the darkness spreading around us. Meanwhile, Helen's attempts to manipulate social perception grew bolder. She posted glowing photos of herself and Jamie portraying an idyllic stepmother role. Friends and family were divided, whispers and doubts swirling in the background. but the truth was on my side. The court hearings began, and with every session I presented the evidence Sarah and I had gathered. Helen's carefully woven web started to unravel. In the courtroom, I saw a different Mark, a man trying to justify his betrayal with hollow excuses, trying to paint me as the one who was unstable or unfit. But the truth spoke louder than his words. The judge saw through the smoke and mirrors. Outside the courtroom, I found unexpected support from friends and even some family members who had been hesitant before. They began to stand by me, offering comfort and strength. As the legal battle waged on, I also focused on healing Jamie. The damage Helen and Mark caused was deep, but love and consistency became our armor. One evening, as we sat together watching the stars, Jamie asked Mom, "Will everything be okay?" I smiled through tears and promised, "Yes, Jamie. We'll be okay. We have each other." The fight wasn't over, but I knew we were on the path to reclaiming what was rightfully ours. The perfect ending for the two traitors was still ahead, and I was ready to see it through. The emotional turmoil that had engulfed our lives was no longer just a silent undercurrent. It was a raging storm, relentless and unforgiving. Every day felt like walking a tightrope stretched precariously over an abyss, with Jamie balancing on one side and me desperately clinging to the other. The pain of losing my husband to Helen was profound, but watching my son's innocent heart become torn between two maternal figures was a devastation I never imagined possible. Jamie's confusion grew deeper with each passing week. I could see it in the way he hesitated before calling me Mom, as if unsure if he still had the right. The child who once ran eagerly into my arms now sometimes looked at me with wary eyes, searching for reassurance that he wasn't losing me too. One afternoon, Jamie came home from school with a silence that was heavier than any words could carry. He sat at the kitchen table, poking absently at his sandwich, his mind clearly elsewhere. I waited for the right moment, then gently asked Jamie, "What's on your mind?" He looked up, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "Mom, why does Helen say she's my real mom?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I felt my breath catch, my heart pounding in my chest as the words echoed through the room. Helen had been planting seeds of doubt in my son's mind, slowly but surely rewriting the story of our family. I took a deep breath and reached across the table to hold Jamie's small hands in mine. "Jamie," I said softly, "Helen is not your mom. I am. I have been here since the day you were born. I have loved you every single day, even when things got hard." He looked down at our joined hands, then back into my eyes, searching for certainty. "But Daddy and Helen say they love me too." I nodded slowly, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. Sometimes people say things that aren't true, or they say things to get what they want. But love isn't just words. It's about being there for you, taking care of you, protecting you, and loving you no matter what. Jamie's brow furrowed confusion, mixing with sadness. "I don't understand." "It's okay," I reassured him. "I'm here, and I will always be here. You don't have to understand everything right now. Just know that my love for you is real, and I will never stop fighting for you." That night, as I tucked him into bed, I held him close and made a silent vow. No matter how difficult, no matter how many battles lay ahead, I would do everything in my power to restore his trust and bring him back to me. But it wasn't just Jamie's heart I needed to win. It was the war outside our home that threatened to isolate us. Helen's influence had spread beyond Mark and Jamie. She was expertly weaving a web of manipulation, turning friends and family against me with whispers, half-truths, and subtle insinuations. I became the outsider, the woman who had supposedly lost her grip on reality, the jealous wife who was destroying a happy family. The isolation was suffocating. Invitations stopped coming. People who once smiled warmly now avoided my gaze. I heard quiet conversations stop when I entered the room. The world I had built was crumbling, and I was left standing in the rubble. but I refused to be silenced or defeated. I clung to the few who stood firmly by my side: Sarah, my loyal friend and legal ally, who helped me navigate the overwhelming paperwork and court proceedings; a handful of close friends who offered me refuge and strength when I felt weakest. Their unwavering support became my lifeline. They reminded me I was not alone, that truth and love could still prevail. The courtroom became the stage for our painful battle. Helen and Mark put on their act of innocence and righteousness, spinning stories meant to paint me as unstable and unfit. But the evidence Sarah and I presented was damning. Emails, texts, recordings, all revealing Helen's manipulative schemes and Mark's betrayal. The judge's piercing questions exposed cracks in their carefully constructed facades. Helen's polished smile faltered under scrutiny. Mark's excuses grew hollow. Outside the courtroom, I found solace in the small victories, moments when Jamie smiled without hesitation, when he called me Mom with genuine warmth, when our bond felt unbreakable, despite the chaos around us. One afternoon, I took Jamie to a quiet lakeside park, a place away from prying eyes and whispered judgments. We skipped stones on the water's surface, watching the ripples spread and fade, much like the pain I hoped would someday heal. I told Jamie stories of resilience and hope, of people who had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger. I wanted him to understand that no matter how dark things seemed, there was always light on the horizon. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jamie looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes and whispered, "I love you, Mom." Tears filled my eyes. In that moment, all the pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, they melted away. What mattered was the love between us, unbreakable and fierce. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I had reclaimed my strength, my dignity, and most importantly, my son's heart. The perfect ending for the two traitors was still ahead, and I was ready to see it through. As the dust of the courtroom battle settled just enough for me to catch a breath, I realized something crucial. This fight wasn't just about exposing Helen and Mark, or even about legal victories. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my peace, and most importantly, my son's trust and happiness. But to do that, I needed a plan, a strategy that went beyond court papers and courtroom drama. I needed to take back control in a way they never saw coming. For weeks, I sat with Sarah and my closest friends, mapping out every angle, every possible move. We knew Helen would keep fighting, and Mark, despite his betrayals, was still a powerful influence. But they underestimated the strength I'd found in myself, the fierce, quiet power of a mother who refuses to lose her child. My plan began with Jamie. He was the heart of everything. I couldn't just win this war on paper. I had to win his heart. The betrayal had torn a hole in his world, and I had to fill it with love, patience, and consistency. I started by creating new rituals for us, simple, sacred moments where the outside chaos couldn't reach. Sunday mornings became our time: pancakes, cartoons, and long talks about everything and nothing. Weekday evenings were for homework and story time with no distractions, just me and Jamie reconnecting. Each moment was a thread slowly weaving our fractured bond back together. But rebuilding trust isn't easy when shadows lurk in every corner. Helen's influence was persistent, insidious. She showed up at Jamie's school events, smiling sweetly to teachers and parents, making sure everyone saw her as the caring, devoted stepmother. She sent him gifts, carefully chosen toys and books that subtly replaced the ones I'd given. I watched helplessly as Jamie sometimes looked at me, and then at the gift's confusion flashing in his eyes. One afternoon, after picking him up from school, Jamie said quietly, "Mom, Helen says she loves me more than anyone else." I stopped the car and looked at him with everything I had. "Jamie, no one can love you like I do. Helen's words don't change that." "But why does Daddy listen to her more than to me or you?" he asked, his voice small and broken. That question broke me inside. How do you explain the betrayal of a father to a child who only wants love and security? I took a deep breath and said, sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense. But you have to remember, Jamie, you are loved more than words can say. By me always. I knew the journey ahead would be long. Jamie's heart was pulled in different directions, and it was my job to make sure he knew where his true home was. Beyond Jamie, I knew I had to dismantle Helen's carefully built image. Her public persona was a weapon, and if left unchallenged, it would swallow me whole. Sarah and I began reaching out to those who mattered: family members, friends, and even a few colleagues who had been hesitant or silent before. We shared the truth gently but firmly, giving them the evidence and letting the facts speak for themselves. Slowly, loyalties shifted. People started seeing Helen's manipulations for what they were. It was a quiet revolution. Then came the moment I had prepared for: a direct, undeniable confrontation, designed not just to expose, but to break the spell Helen had cast. I invited Helen to meet me at a neutral location, a bustling cafe, where our conversation would be witnessed, recorded, and impossible to deny. I wasn't there to argue or beg. I was there to show her that I was no longer afraid. When she arrived, her smile was icy perfection, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I laid out everything: the emails, the lies, the ways she'd tried to rewrite our family's story. Her facade cracked ever so slightly. "You don't understand," she said, voice low and venomous. "Mark and I love each other. Jamie deserves a real family." I met her gaze steadily. A family built on lies and betrayal isn't real. It's a prison. The confrontation was electric, raw, and necessary. It didn't resolve everything, but it forced Helen out of the shadows and into the light. Mark was next. Faced with the undeniable truth, he tried to justify his choices to defend the woman who had stolen our lives. But his words fell flat, empty. His betrayal was complete, and the consequences were beginning to catch up with him. At home, I focused on Jamie. Every smile, every mom he uttered with love was a victory. We rebuilt our world with patience and care, one moment at a time. Through all the pain, all the heartbreak, I discovered strength I never knew I had: the power to fight, to heal, and to reclaim what was mine. The perfect ending for two traitors was still on the horizon, but this time I held the pen. By the time I reached this point, I knew that I was no longer the quiet woman who had silently endured betrayal. I was a mother, a warrior, a force fueled by the pain of losing the family I loved, and the fierce determination to take it back, no matter the cost. After the confrontation with Helen, things began to change. Slowly but unmistakably, the walls of their secret world were cracking, and the alliances that had seemed unbreakable were starting to falter. But the battle was far from over. Mark was still deeply entangled with Helen, and Jamie was still caught in the crossfire. I had to act with precision and care. My plan was twofold: continue building a stronger bond with Jamie while simultaneously exposing the full extent of Helen and Mark's manipulations to everyone around us. First, Jamie. He was the heart of everything, the innocent child who deserved a mother's love, not the confusion and divided loyalties he was forced to navigate every day. I devoted every spare moment to him, helping with schoolwork, listening to his hopes and fears, creating a safe space where he could be just a child again. One rainy Saturday morning, I brought Jamie to the small bookstore he loved, a cozy place filled with shelves of stories and possibilities. We wandered through aisles, picking out books to read together. I could see the light returning to his eyes, the boy who had been lost in the shadows beginning to reemerge. As we sat curled up on the faded couch in the corner, reading about brave heroes and magical lands, Jamie's head rested on my shoulder. For a moment, the world outside that room faded away, and all that mattered was the bond we were rebuilding page by page. But the cracks weren't just healing in my son's heart, they were spreading wider in Helen's carefully constructed world. With Sarah's help, I continued to gather evidence, not just the obvious emails and texts, but the subtle, insidious ways Helen had tried to isolate me from Jamie and our community. She had manipulated friends, spread rumors, and even contacted Jamie's teachers with false stories designed to discredit me. One afternoon, Sarah handed me a file thick with affidavits from neighbors' teachers, and even former colleagues who had witnessed Helen's manipulative behavior firsthand. It was a damning testament to a woman who played the victim on the surface but pulled the strings behind the scenes with ruthless precision. Armed with this, I knew it was time to expand my circle of support. I reached out to family members who had been silent or uncertain, sharing the full story and the evidence we'd collected. Some were shocked, others angry, but most were grateful to finally understand the truth. Slowly, the tide was turning. One by one, walls built by lies and fear began to crumble. I also worked on my own healing. Betrayal leaves wounds that run deep not just in the heart, but in the mind and soul. I started therapy, finding a counselor who helped me navigate the complex emotions of grief, anger, and loss. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was necessary. Every session helped me reclaim pieces of myself that Helen and Mark had tried to erase. The legal battles intensified. Court dates stretched on, with Helen and Mark fighting tooth and nail to maintain their grip on Jamie and the image they had cultivated. But the truth was relentless. During one hearing, I presented a timeline of their deception, the secret meetings the lies told to me and to Jamie, the manipulation of people around us. The judge listened intently, visibly disturbed by the extent of the betrayal. For the first time, I saw real cracks in their defense. Outside the courtroom, my friends and family offered a shield of support, attending hearings, helping with Jamie, and standing by me when the world felt heavy. Despite the stress and heartache, Jamie and I found moments of peace. One evening, after a long day of court proceedings, Jamie and I sat on the porch, swing the warm summer air wrapping around us. He leaned into me and said quietly, "Mom, I'm glad you didn't give up on me." Tears welled in my eyes as I held him close. "I'll never give up on you, Jamie. You're my whole world." That night, as I watched him sleep, I knew that no matter what the future held, we had already won the most important battle. Our bond was unbreakable. But there was one final step I needed to take. I couldn't just wait for justice. I had to deliver a reckoning that would stop Helen and Mark from hurting us ever again. With Sarah and a trusted private investigator, I gathered the last pieces of evidence, the proof of Helen's financial manipulations, the deceitful plans to remove me completely from Jamie's life, and Mark's willful blindness to the damage he'd caused. The day I presented this to the court was the day I felt the full weight of my journey. Standing there, voice steady despite the tremors inside, I laid bare the truth in front of everyone: friends, family, strangers, and, most importantly, my son. Helen's expression faltered and Mark's eyes darted nervously. The walls closed in on them and their facade crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of Jamie and ordering restrictions that would keep Helen at a distance. It was the justice I had fought for, the perfect ending for two traitors who had tried to steal everything from me. Walking out of the courtroom, Jamie's hand in mine, I felt a surge of hope and relief. The nightmare was ending and a new chapter was beginning, one filled with love, healing, and the promise of a future reclaimed. Together, we would rebuild. The courtroom's heavy doors closed behind us with a finality that still echoes in my mind. Jamie squeezed my hand tightly, his small fingers clinging to mine as if to anchor us both to the reality that after everything, we were finally free. I looked down at him, at the child who had endured so much confusion and heartbreak, and I felt a profound sense of responsibility and fierce protectiveness. This victory was more than just legal. It was a reclamation of our lives, our future. Yet even with the judge's ruling granting me full custody and limiting Helen's contact, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Helen and Mark's betrayal had left scars that wouldn't fade overnight, and rebuilding Jamie's trust in me and his sense of safety would take time and unwavering patience. The first few days after the ruling were surreal. There was a cautious peace in our home, a silence that was heavy with relief, but also uncertainty. Jamie was quiet, his emotions a swirling mix of relief, confusion, and lingering fear. He wasn't sure how to process the change, and I knew I needed to be the steady presence he could rely on. I made a promise to myself to rebuild our lives gently but deliberately. The small things, the morning hugs, bedtime stories, quiet walks in the park became sacred rituals. I wanted Jamie to feel deep in his bones that he was loved beyond measure, and that I was his unwavering protector. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing watching the stars emerge, Jamie turned to me and said softly, "Mom, do you think things will ever be normal again?" I looked at him, the boy I had fought so hard for, and smiled gently. "Maybe not the same as before, sweetheart, but we'll make a new normal one filled with love, trust, and happiness." He nodded, resting his head on my shoulder. In that moment, all the pain and struggle felt worth it. Outside, the home life continued to shift. Helen, now legally barred from contact, began to fade from our lives. Mark, faced with the consequences of his choices, retreated into silence and regret. Though the wounds they caused would never fully disappear, the power they held over us was broken. I focused on healing not just Jamie's wounds but my own. Therapy sessions helped me process the betrayal and rebuild my sense of self. I found strength in friendships renewed and new passions discovered. Slowly, I reclaimed the woman I had been before the darkness settled in. Yet the experience left me changed, more cautious, but also more fiercely determined. I vowed never to let anyone take away my happiness or my family again. As weeks turned to months, Jamie blossomed. His laughter returned bright and clear like sunshine after a storm. We created new memories, picnics in the park, art projects at home, and quiet nights filled with books and dreams. One afternoon, as Jamie presented me with a handmade card, he smiled shyly and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me." Tears filled my eyes. "I will always be here for you, Jamie, no matter what." Looking back on the journey, the pain, the betrayal, the fight, I understood that the perfect ending wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about survival, love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. And that bond would carry us forward into a future we would build together, stronger than ever. The healing process continued in waves, some days filled with quiet joy, others shadowed by lingering pain. Yet through it all, Jamie and I found strength in one another, slowly rebuilding what had been broken. The love that once seemed threatened now anchored us like a lifeline, unshakable despite the scars. I noticed the subtle changes in Jamie, the way he smiled without hesitation, the ease with which he approached new experiences, and the gentle confidence returning to his eyes. He was beginning to heal, and so was I. But healing wasn't a straight path. The echoes of betrayal remained, especially when unexpected moments pulled the past back into focus. Sometimes Jamie would ask about Mark or Helen, his questions tinged with confusion and longing. Other times, I caught myself flinching at a memory or a glance that reminded me of the pain we'd endured. One afternoon, Jamie came to me holding a photograph from school. It was a class picture, and there, standing beside him, was a familiar face, Helen, smiling as if she belonged. The sight stirred a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, but also resolve. I sat down with Jamie and explained gently, "Sometimes people come and go in our lives. What matters is the love and care we have now, and I promise you that will never change." He nodded, trusting me, his mother, to guide him through the confusing world. Our home became a sanctuary, a place where laughter grew louder and love deeper. I filled it with warmth, bright colors, family photos, and the smell of fresh baking. Each corner whispered stories of resilience and hope. Outside, my friendships strengthened. Sarah remained a steadfast pillar, always ready with advice or a comforting word. Other friends, once distant or hesitant, returned to my life, their support a balm to my weary heart. I also began volunteering at Jamie's school, becoming involved in his world in ways I hadn't before. It was a way to rebuild trust, not just with him, but with the community, showing that despite everything, we were here to stay. Slowly, I reclaimed my sense of self, discovering new passions and joys beyond the shadows of the past. I started writing again, pouring my emotions onto the page, a therapeutic release and a testament to the woman I was becoming. But through it all, Jamie remained my focus. His happiness, his safety, and his love were my greatest victories. One night, as I tucked him into bed, Jamie looked up at me with a smile that reached his eyes and said, "Mom, I'm glad we're together. I feel safe with you." I kissed his forehead, tears of gratitude spilling over. "You are safe, Jamie. Always." The perfect ending for two traitors wasn't just about justice or revenge, it was about reclaiming life, love, and family. And in that moment, I knew we had done just that. After the court's ruling finally delivered justice, a fragile calm settled over my life. It felt almost surreal to walk out of the courtroom holding Jamie's hand, no longer as a woman crushed by betrayal, but as a mother fighting fiercely for her child's future. Yet beneath the surface, I knew the hardest work was just beginning, not the legal battles, but the slow, painstaking process of healing the wounds that Helen and Mark had inflicted on my son's heart and on mine. Our home, once filled with silent tension and shadows, began to breathe again. The walls seemed less oppressive, the air lighter. I worked to create a sanctuary for Jamie, a place where he could feel safe and loved without fear or confusion. But the scars were still there, etched deep into both of us, invisible yet undeniable. Jamie, though young, carried the weight of their betrayal more than I could have imagined. Nights were often restless. He would wake in the dark, calling softly for me, his voice trembling with fears he didn't fully understand. Sometimes, as I held him close in the quiet darkness, I could feel the tremors of anxiety ripple through his small body. My heart broke anew each time, knowing that the innocence stolen from him couldn't be restored overnight. He began asking questions that caught me off guard, questions that revealed the complexity of his pain. "Mom, why doesn't Daddy come to see me anymore?" He would ask, his eyes wide and searching. I struggled for answers. How do you explain the choices of a man who has betrayed not only his wife, but his child? How do you tell a 7-year-old that the father who once promised to protect him now chose another woman? The questions were piercing the silence between us heavy. One evening, as the rain tapped gently against the window, Jamie and I sat at the kitchen table, the soft light casting shadows on his small face. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "do you think Daddy still loves me?" I reached across and took his hand, squeezing gently. "Jamie, sometimes people make choices that are hard to understand. But what I want you to know is that I love you with all my heart, and that love will never change." He looked at me, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and nodded slowly. "I love you too, Mom." That moment was a small victory, a beacon of hope in the murky aftermath of our ordeal. To help Jamie heal, I began to rebuild our routines, small acts of normalcy that grounded us both. Sunday mornings became sacred. We'd wake early and make pancakes together, the kitchen filled with laughter and the smell of syrup. Weeknights were for stories, sometimes silly, sometimes adventurous, always with me reading to him in our cozy living room. These moments were my way of stitching the fabric of our family back together, one thread at a time. But healing Jamie was only part of the journey. I realized I also had to confront my own pain, the deep wounds left by betrayal. So I started therapy, weekly sessions that slowly helped me untangle the mess of emotions, grief, anger, self-doubt, and eventually, forgiveness. It was not a linear path. Some weeks brought breakthroughs. others a return to despair. But gradually, I found pieces of myself that had been lost: strength, resilience, and a new sense of identity. Returning to work part-time was another step toward reclaiming my life. The office became a place where I could rediscover passions outside motherhood and betrayal, a space to breathe and grow. Colleagues welcomed me back warmly, some offering encouragement, others simply treating me like a person rather than a victim. These small gestures meant the world. Outside of work, friendships that had frayed during the crisis began to mend. Sarah remained my steadfast ally, her unwavering support a constant source of strength. Other friends, once distant or unsure, stepped back into my life, their presence a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. However, the journey of healing was far from straightforward. There were days when the pain surged anew, when a memory caught me off guard or a sideways glance reminded me of what I'd lost. Those were the moments I struggled most, when the past threatened to drag me under. One afternoon, Jamie brought home a drawing from school that made my heart swell with a mixture of pride and bittersweet emotion. It was a family portrait, imperfect, but genuine. There we were, Jamie and me holding hands beneath a bright, shining sun. I was there, fully present, the mother reclaiming her place. He beamed with pride as he handed me the picture. "That's us, Mom. That's our family." I hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of hope. In that moment, I knew we were no longer prisoners of betrayal or broken promises. We were a family, healing, growing, and moving forward. But the perfect ending for two traitors was never about revenge. It was about survival, the determination to love fiercely despite pain, to protect fiercely despite fear, and to rebuild fiercely despite loss. And with Jamie by my side, I was ready to face whatever the future held. The healing was gradual, often fragile, and at times painfully slow. Even after the court ruling had secured our future, the scars left by Helen and Mark's betrayal lingered in ways I hadn't anticipated. The battle for Jamie's heart and my own peace wasn't over. It was evolving into a long journey of rebuilding trust, learning to forgive, and redefining what family truly meant. Jamie, despite his young age, showed a remarkable strength. He was like a small sapling bent by fierce winds but determined to grow straight and strong. Some days I saw glimpses of the carefree boy he once was, the genuine laughter, the bright curiosity, the joy in simple moments. Yet other days, shadows crossed his face, hesitation when mentioning Mark, confusion in his eyes, moments when the weight of betrayal seemed too heavy for him to bear. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through our living room window, Jamie and I sat together on the couch. He was quieter than usual, his small fingers fiddling with the hem of his shirt. Finally, he looked up at me with those wide, searching eyes and asked, "Mom, do you think Daddy will ever come back?" The question was like a knife twisting in my heart. How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most walk away without looking back? How do you soften the sting of abandonment without lying? I took a deep breath and chose my words with care. "Jamie, sometimes adults make choices that are hard to understand, and sometimes those choices hurt the people they love. But no matter what, I am here. I am not going anywhere. I love you more than anything, and that love will never change." He leaned his head against my shoulder, a quiet gesture of trust and comfort. In that moment, I felt the profound weight of our journey, the pain we had endured, and the resilience that was slowly healing us both. Beyond the emotional rebuilding at home, life began to find a new rhythm. The small victories became beacons of hope. Jamie's first solo performance in his school recital, the gleam of pride in his eyes as he took his bows. Our weekend trips to the local library where we'd spend hours exploring new worlds in books. The way his laughter once again filled our home light and unburdened. Friends and family, some who had been distant during the crisis, gradually returned, offering support and kindness that reminded me I wasn't alone. Sarah remained my steadfast rock, her unwavering presence a source of strength and guidance through the darkest moments. I also began to make peace with the past. Therapy sessions helped me untangle the complicated web of grief, anger, and betrayal. I learned that forgiveness was not about excusing the hurt caused by Helen and Mark, but about releasing the hold their actions had over my life. It was a gift I gave myself to heal and move forward without being chained to bitterness. Work became a sanctuary, where I rediscovered parts of myself I thought had been lost. I threw myself into projects with renewed passion, finding satisfaction and purpose beyond the roles of wife and mother. My colleagues welcomed me back warmly, treating me with respect and kindness that helped rebuild my confidence. Most importantly, I redefined what family meant. It was no longer about perfection or appearances. Family was love, trust, and resilience. It was about those who stand by you in your darkest hours and celebrate with you in your brightest moments. One afternoon, Jamie surprised me with a handmade card. It was simple, decorated with colorful drawings and a heartfelt message scrawled in his uneven handwriting. "Thank you for never giving up on me, Mom." Tears welled in my eyes as I pulled him close. In that embrace, I felt the culmination of our long and painful journey, the betrayal, the struggle, the healing, and the love that had carried us through. The perfect ending for two traitors was not about punishment or revenge. It was about survival, growth, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. And with Jamie by my side, I knew we had found that ending together. The days grew longer, and with each passing moment, the remnants of the betrayal faded further into the past. Yet healing, true, deep healing, was a process that tested every ounce of my strength and patience. After the court's verdict, Jamie and I began to rebuild a life that felt safe and whole, but the echoes of what we had endured still whispered in quiet moments. I remember one particular morning vividly. Jamie and I sat together at the breakfast table, the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow around us. His face was bright with excitement, the kind of genuine happiness that had been rare for so long. He told me about a new friend he'd made at school, about the games they played and the stories they shared. It was the kind of simple joy that reminded me how precious these moments were. But as I watched him, a pang of sadness crept in, an awareness that his childhood had been stolen, that the innocence every child deserves had been tainted by betrayal and confusion. I reached across the table, taking his hand in mine, and promised silently that I would protect him with everything I had. The outside world was changing too. Helen's influence had been legally curtailed, but the scars she left on our community were still visible. Some whispered behind our backs, others avoided us entirely. It was a reminder that the battle was not just ours, it had touched everyone around us. I focused on creating new memories, new traditions that would define our family on our own terms. Weekends were for adventures, trips to the park, picnics by the lake, visits to museums where Jamie's eyes would light up with wonder. I wanted to fill his world with light and love to replace the shadows Helen had cast. Slowly, our home transformed from a place of pain into a sanctuary. I painted the walls in soft, comforting colors and filled the shelves with books and games. Every corner held a story of resilience and hope, a testament to the strength we had found. But healing wasn't just about Jamie. It was about me reclaiming my identity beyond betrayal and motherhood. I resumed hobbies I had abandoned, painting, writing, even yoga activities that nurtured my soul and helped me reconnect with myself. Each small step was a victory, a declaration that I was more than the sum of my pain. Therapy continued to be a vital part of my journey. Sitting in that quiet room, I confronted the tangled emotions that betrayal had left behind. I learned to forgive, not to forget or excuse, but to free myself from the chains of bitterness. Forgiveness was the key that unlocked my heart, allowing me to love Jamie fully and fearlessly. Friends who had stood by me became pillars of support, reminding me of my worth when I doubted it. Sarah especially was a constant presence, a reminder that even in darkness, light could be found. One evening, as Jamie and I prepared for bed, he looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes and said, "Mom, I'm happy now. I feel safe with you." Tears filled my eyes as I held him close. "You're safe, Jamie. Always." The perfect ending for two traitors was not about vengeance. It was about survival love and the unbreakable bond between mother and child. Our story, once shattered by betrayal, had become a testament to resilience. Together we had found peace. The day I had both feared and longed for finally arrived, not with fanfare or dramatic confrontations, but with a quiet, profound sense of closure. After everything, the betrayals, the sleepless nights, the endless battles, I found myself standing on the edge of a new beginning. A beginning not born of revenge or bitterness, but of survival, healing, and love. I woke that morning with a deep breath, the sunlight spilling softly through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the room. Jamie was already awake, his small frame curled beneath a patchwork quilt, the peaceful rise and fall of his breathing, a balm to my restless heart. I sat beside him, watching his eyelashes flutter as he dreamed a vivid reminder of the innocence I'd fought so hard to protect. In the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of pancakes, Jamie's favorite breakfast. The simple rituals we'd rebuilt were more precious than any grand gesture. Over our morning meal, Jamie's laughter bubbled freely, light and unburdened, filling the space that once held silence and pain. Watching him, I was flooded with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the boy he was becoming, resilient, joyful, and fiercely loving despite the shadows cast upon his childhood. And sorrow for the moments lost, for the innocence stolen by the betrayals of the past. Yet that sorrow was tempered by hope. Hope born from every small victory, every quiet smile, every mom spoken with love and certainty. After breakfast, we took a slow walk to the park, the fresh air crisp with the promise of spring. Jamie ran ahead, his laughter echoing against the blue sky, a sound I'd longed to hear again. I followed, savoring the sight of his carefree joy, the untainted happiness that now defined his days. We settled beneath an ancient oak tree, its sprawling branches offering shade and comfort. Jamie leaned against me, his warmth a reminder of all that was worth fighting for. As I looked at him, I reflected on the long journey we had traveled, from the depths of betrayal to the fragile peace we now held. The past had tried to define us, to shatter us, but love had been stronger. Resilience had won. Later that day, as twilight settled over our neighborhood, I found myself alone with my thoughts. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments when despair threatened to consume me, when the pain of betrayal felt unbearable. But through it all, I discovered strength I never knew I possessed. Therapy had been a lifeline, an ongoing process of confronting grief, anger, and fear. I learned to forgive, not to absolve those who had hurt me, but to free myself from the prison of bitterness. Forgiveness was my path to peace. Returning to work rekindled parts of me I thought lost. I embraced my career with passion, finding purpose and independence. My friends, both old and new, became my support system, a reminder that I was never truly alone. Most importantly, I redefined what family meant. It was no longer about perfection or appearances. It was about love, trust, and the courage to rebuild from the ashes. One evening, Jamie surprised me with a handmade card decorated with bright colors and heartfelt words. "Thank you for never giving up on me, Mom." I held him close, tears streaming down my face. In that embrace, I felt the culmination of our journey, the pain, the fight, the healing, and the unbreakable bond between us. As night fell, we sat together beneath a sky full of stars, dreaming of the future. Jamie's peaceful face was a testament to everything we had overcome. The perfect ending for two traitors wasn't about destruction. It was about love survival and new beginnings. With Jamie by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. Our story was far from over, but this chapter closed with hope, strength, and a promise to cherish every moment of the life we were rebuilding together.